At its peak, Baghdad held over 1 million people, making it the largest city on earth. In 762 AD, Caliph al-Mansur didn't just build a city, he built the center of the world. Scholars, merchants, and astronomers from every civilization poured through its 4 golden gates. For 5 centuries, Baghdad led the world in medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. Then, in 1258, it was gone, erased in just 6 days. In the next few minutes, we rebuild Baghdad, from the first brick to the last burning library. Nothing about Baghdad was accidental. Caliph al-Mansur did not simply choose a location. He summoned astronomers. He consulted mathematicians. He studied the land, the rivers, and the sky before placing a single stone. The site sat between 2 great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. Water flowed on every side. Trade could arrive from the north, south, east, and west. No enemy could approach unseen. No merchant could pass without entering. It was the perfect location for the center of the world. And then the construction began. 100,000 workers arrived. Architects, engineers, laborers, and craftsmen came from across the Abbasid Empire. They worked in shifts, day and night, season after season. For 4 years, the ground trembled with the sound of building. What rose from that earth was unlike anything before it. The city was a perfect circle. This was not decoration. This was intention. A circular city meant that every point on the outer wall stood at an equal distance from the palace at the center. No single gate was closer to power than another. Every direction was balanced. Every entrance was equal. The outer wall stood nearly 90 feet high. It was built from fired brick and hardened mortar. Towers rose at regular intervals along its length. Guards watched from every angle. The wall did not simply protect Baghdad. It announced it. 4 great gates pierced the circular wall. Each gate faced one of the 4 corners of the known world. The Khorasan gate faced northeast toward Persia and Central Asia. The Basra gate opened south toward the Persian Gulf and the sea trade beyond. The Kufa gate led west toward Syria and the Mediterranean. The Damascus gate pointed northwest toward the heart of the Old World. Each gate was a statement. Each one said, "We are connected to everything." Beyond the outer wall, a deep moat circled the city. Then came a second wall, even stronger than the first. Soldiers stationed between the 2 walls could move quickly in any direction. The design made Baghdad nearly impossible to breach by force. Inside the second wall, the city opened up. Wide roads stretched from each gate directly toward the center. Smaller streets branched off in careful patterns. Markets occupied the outer rings. Residential neighborhoods filled the middle. And at the very heart of everything stood 2 structures that defined the entire city. The Palace of the Golden Gate rose at the center. Its green dome could be seen for miles outside the walls. Beside it stood the Grand Mosque, where the call to prayer echoed across every street, every rooftop, every courtyard in the city. Together, these 2 buildings told every person who entered exactly what Baghdad was. A city of faith, a city of power, a city built to last forever. Not every battle in Baghdad was fought with swords. Some battles were fought with ink. Inside the walls of the Bayt el-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, a different kind of conquest was happening. Scholars were capturing knowledge. Translators were unlocking ancient texts. Scientists were pushing the boundaries of everything humanity understood about the world. This was not a library. Not exactly. It was a living institution. A place where learning was treated as sacred work. Where a mathematician and a physician could sit at the same table, argue through the night, and emerge the next morning with something the world had never seen before. The House of Wisdom did not happen suddenly. It grew. It began under Caliph al-Mansur as a small translation bureau. Persian texts arrived first. Then Greek manuscripts followed. Works by Aristotle, Plato, and Galen were carried into Baghdad by scholars who had traveled weeks to deliver them. Each manuscript was treated like treasure, because it was. Under Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the institution expanded. More scholars arrived. More languages were studied. Arabic became the language of science across the known world. Not because it was forced, but because Baghdad was where all serious knowledge now lived. Then came Caliph al-Mamun, and everything accelerated. Al-Mamun was not content to collect knowledge. He wanted to produce it. He sent delegations to Byzantium specifically to retrieve ancient Greek texts. He paid translators in gold, Some accounts suggest they were paid the weight of their translated manuscripts. He built observation rooms where astronomers tracked the movement of stars across the Baghdad sky. The scholars who gathered here came from everywhere. Al-Khwarizmi worked within these walls. His treatise on calculation gave the world algebra. The very word algorithm carries his name across every century that followed. His work on numerals replaced cumbersome Roman counting systems with something faster, cleaner, and more powerful. Al-Kindi wrote on philosophy, music, medicine, and mathematics. Ibn Ishaq al-Kindi translated Greek philosophy into Arabic with such precision that European scholars would later rely on his versions for centuries. Hunayn ibn Ishaq translated medical texts by Galen and Hippocrates. His Arabic versions of these works became the foundation of medicine taught across the Islamic world and eventually across Europe. The daily rhythm inside the House of Wisdom was one of quiet intensity. Scribes copied manuscripts by hand, line by careful line. Translators worked in pairs, one reading aloud, one writing. Scholars debated in open courtyards. Students sat in circles around masters, absorbing every word. Outside those walls, Baghdad hummed with commerce and prayer. But inside, the world was being rewritten. Step outside the House of Wisdom, walk through the courtyard, pass through the gate, and suddenly, Baghdad hits you all at once. The noise, the color, the smell. This is not a quiet city. This is not a city that sleeps late or moves slowly. Baghdad in its golden age is alive in every direction, at every hour, with an energy that no traveler ever forgot after experiencing it. The markets begin at the outer rings of the city. Al-Mansur originally placed the markets inside the walls. But the volume of trade grew so quickly, so relentlessly, that the markets eventually spilled beyond the circular city entirely. New market districts formed along the banks of the Tigris. Entire neighborhoods organized themselves around specific trades. There was a street for booksellers, a district for metalworkers, a section dedicated entirely to perfume merchants. Money changers sat at fixed positions, surrounded by scales and foreign coins from a dozen different kingdoms. Walk into the spice market and the air changes completely. Saffron from Persia, cinnamon from Ceylon, black pepper from the Malabar coast of India, cardamom, cloves, and dried ginger stacked in open sacks. Merchants called out prices in Arabic, Persian, and Aramaic simultaneously. Buyers moved from stall to stall, pressing spices between their fingers, lifting jars to their noses. The textile district stretched for hundreds of stalls. Silk arrived from China along the overland routes through Central Asia. Cotton cloth came up from Egypt. Fine wool traveled from the highlands of Anatolia. Dyes turned fabrics into deep reds, brilliant blues, and rich yellows. Tailors worked in open workshops while customers waited, watching their garments take shape stitch by stitch. The river brought everything else. The Tigris was Baghdad's great artery. Boats arrived daily, heavy with dates from Basra, timber from the mountains of the north, fish pulled fresh from the river itself. Dockhands unloaded cargo onto stone quays while merchants recorded every item on sheets of paper. Paper itself was significant. Baghdad had adopted paper-making from Chinese techniques learned through Central Asian contact. Before long, paper mills operated along the Tigris. Paper replaced papyrus and parchment across the Islamic world. Books became cheaper. Knowledge spread faster. The markets sold paper alongside silk and spices. Ordinary families lived in neighborhoods layered between the great markets. Houses were built around interior courtyards. Thick walls kept out the summer heat. Fountains in central courtyards cooled the air. Families gathered in the evenings on rooftops, where the night breeze came off the river and the city slowly quieted around them. Children played in narrow streets between mud brick walls. Bakers pulled bread from clay ovens before sunrise. Mosques marked every neighborhood, their minarets rising above the rooftops. This was not a city of kings alone. This was a city of a million ordinary lives, each one part of something extraordinary. Every great city carries the seeds of its own decline. Baghdad was no different. From the outside, the Abbasid capital still looked invincible. The markets still roared. The House of Wisdom still burned with lamplight through the night. The golden dome of the palace still caught the morning sun and threw its reflection across the Tigris. But inside the walls, something was shifting. The Abbasid Caliphate was built on a single promise, that one ruler, guided by faith and wisdom, could govern an empire stretching from North Africa to Central Asia. For a generation, that promise held. The early caliphs were strong, focused, and present. But empires grow. And as they grow, they become harder to hold. By the early 800s, the Abbasid court had become extraordinarily complex. Ministers, viziers, military commanders, and court factions all competed for influence. The caliph sat at the center of this web, but the threads were growing tangled. The vizier system was supposed to help. Powerful administrators called viziers managed the day-to-day functions of the empire. They controlled treasury accounts, military appointments, and provincial governors. In theory, this made governance more efficient. In practice, it created dangerous concentrations of power outside the caliph's direct control. The Barmakid family rose to become the most powerful viziers in Abbasid history. For decades, they managed the empire with remarkable skill. But their power eventually alarmed Caliph Harun al-Rashid. In 803 AD, he had the entire Barmakid family arrested, stripped of their wealth, and removed from power overnight. The message was clear, but the damage was already done. Trust inside the court had fractured. Then came the civil war. When Harun al-Rashid died in 809 AD, he left the empire to two sons, Al-Amin and Al-Mamun. He divided the territories between them, believing balance would maintain peace. Instead, it created a fault line. Al-Amin held Baghdad. Al-Mamun controlled the eastern provinces. Within months, both brothers were at war. The conflict lasted 4 years. Armies marched across the empire. Supply lines were cut. Provinces stopped sending tax revenues to Baghdad. The city itself came under siege in 812 AD. Neighborhoods that had taken decades to build were damaged in weeks. Al-Mamun eventually won. Baghdad survived. But it was not the same city. The siege had exposed something uncomfortable. Baghdad could be threatened. Its walls, its markets, its institutions, none of them were as untouchable as they had seemed. The confidence that had defined the Golden Age began to carry a new weight. Uncertainty. The scholars still worked. The merchants still traded. The minarets still called the faithful to prayer 5 times a day. But the cracks were visible now. And cracks, left unattended, always grow. In the winter of 1258, the horizon outside Baghdad turned dark. Not from clouds, not from storm, from armies. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, had spent years methodically destroying every city that stood between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Fortress after fortress had fallen. Kingdom after kingdom had collapsed. Now his forces, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, surrounded the greatest city in the Islamic world. The Caliph al-Mustasim did not believe it would end this way. He had received warnings. Envoys had arrived months earlier carrying Hulagu's demands: submit, or be destroyed. The Caliph hesitated. His advisors were divided. His military commanders were underprepared. The army that had once defended the Abbasid Empire had been weakened by decades of political interference and budget neglect. The response Baghdad sent back was defiant. But defiance without strength is just words. On January 29, 1258, the siege began. Mongol forces crossed the Tigris from both sides simultaneously. Catapults were positioned along the outer banks. Engineering teams moved forward under the cover of arrow fire. The outer defenses of Baghdad, walls that had stood for 5 centuries, began to crack under sustained assault. The Abbasid army moved out to meet them. It was a catastrophic mistake. The force that rode out was ambushed, surrounded, and destroyed within days. The Mongol commanders had anticipated the move. They had prepared for it. When the floodgates of nearby canals were deliberately opened, the ground turned to mud beneath the Abbasid cavalry. Horses stumbled. Formations collapsed. The army that rode out to save Baghdad never returned. The city was now completely exposed. On February 10, 1258, the walls were breached. The Mongol forces entered Baghdad not as conquerors seeking tribute, but as destroyers with a purpose. What followed lasted 13 days. The Grand Mosque fell silent. The palace that had stood at the heart of the round city for 5 centuries was torn open. Neighborhoods that had housed generations of families were put to flame. The House of Wisdom did not survive. Centuries of manuscripts, translations, original works, star charts, medical texts, mathematical treatises, were pulled from shelves and thrown into the Tigris. Accounts from the period described the river running black with ink for days. Every text that had no copy anywhere else in the world was simply gone. Caliph al-Mustasim was captured. He was executed on February 20, 1258, wrapped in cloth so that his royal blood would not touch the ground, as Mongol tradition dictated. 500 years of Abbasid rule ended in 13 days. The markets were silent. The courtyard fountains ran dry. The minarets stood but cast their shadows over rubble. Baghdad, the round city, the city of a million lives, the city that had lit the world with knowledge, had fallen. and the silence that followed was absolute. The walls were gone. The golden dome had collapsed. The round city that Al-Mansur built with such precision and purpose had been reduced to rubble and ash. The streets where merchants once argued over saffron prices stood empty. The courtyards where children played beside fountain water were silent. Baghdad had fallen. But something survived. Not in stone, not in gold, not in the physical structures that the Mongol forces had so thoroughly destroyed. What survived was invisible to an invading army. It could not be burned or drowned or torn from a shelf. It survived in minds, in copies, in the quiet work of scholars who had carried manuscripts out of the city before the walls fell, in translations that had already traveled west to Andalusia, north to Persia, and east to Central Asia decades before Hulagu's armies arrived. The knowledge of Baghdad had already escaped. Al-Khwarizmi's algebra had already reached European universities through Arabic manuscripts preserved in Spain. Surgeons across the Islamic world were already using medical techniques documented inside the House of Wisdom. Astronomers in Persia, Egypt, and Andalusia were already navigating by star charts calculated on the banks of the Tigris. Baghdad had already given its greatest gifts to the world. Think about what those gifts actually were. The numerical system used to calculate everything from market prices to architectural measurements. Baghdad refined and transmitted it. The surgical instruments illustrated in manuscripts by al-Zarawi, developed within the broader scholarly culture the Abbasid Caliphs funded. The foundations of optics studied by Ibn al-Haytham. The geographic surveys that mapped the known world with greater accuracy than anything that had come before. Every one of these achievements carried Baghdad's fingerprints. The city itself slowly rebuilt over the following centuries. New rulers came. New structures rose over the old foundations. The Tigris continued flowing as it always had, indifferent to conquest and reconstruction alike. Baghdad endured as a living city, wounded, transformed, but present. But the Baghdad of the Golden Age, that specific, extraordinary, unrepeatable version of the city, existed only once. It existed in the morning call to prayer echoing off circular walls, in the lamplight burning through the night inside the House of Wisdom, in the noise of 1,000 merchants conducting 1,000 transactions on streets that smelled of spice and river water and fresh bread. That Baghdad lasted roughly 5 centuries. In those 5 centuries, it changed the trajectory of human knowledge more completely than almost any other place in recorded history. The Reconstruction ends here. The city has faded. The streets are quiet. The golden gates no longer catch the morning light. But the world that Baghdad built, the world of algebra, astronomy, medicine, and paper, that world is still standing. And it always will be.